your benefit so that you can begin to make paper for the Indigo presses. We'll get into why this is a good opportunity. We'll divide our talk into some different areas of a review of Indigo printing. We'll talk about what we feel is the best option for Indigo printing, and by that I mean in terms of the quality that it brings to the print, in terms of adhesion and other properties, its ease of running, its overall runnability, and why it's better than other options. And finally, at the end, I'll spend quite a bit of time looking at what you can do in terms of making an Indigo grade. And that's really what my main goal is tonight, is to help you. So we will have a chat window open during the seminar where you can type in a question if you desire. Depending on the question, maybe we'll answer it at the moment, or we may hold it till the end. But as Tom said, we will have a time at the end for you to ask questions. And please ask any question you wish. And again, it's our desire to help you this evening. And so, as I get chat questions, the chat window on my computer is a little small, so if I lean forward and try and read them, I hope that's okay. And let's get started. So why digital printing? Why the Indigo press? These are some of the starting questions. As I'm sure many of you know, the digital print market is growing rapidly. Other areas of graphics are struggling at the moment, at least in the Americas, and I imagine in different parts of the world. But the digital area is growing rapidly and has continued steady growth. If you want to look at the growth of digital print and reasons why, you can easily go on a web search, type in digital printing, market size, or whatever you would like, pull up the images, and you can learn a great deal about the growth of the market in different areas of growth. Or you could purchase a report from a number of different companies that will describe the growth in digital printing. And so it's one of the opportunities right now to be able to use our mills effectively. And so why the Indigo press? So let's go to the next slide. So the Indigo printing press from Hewlett-Packard is, in our view and in many people's views, the premier press for giving quality print, digital print. And by digital print, if in case some of you are new to this area, in digital printing, every page can be unique. Every page can accept variable data. So you can print a book in a matter of seconds, one copy, or you can do artwork of different types. You can use promotional materials so that every piece is different for individual people. Some of you are probably familiar with things like Coca-Cola campaigns. At least we have them in Americas, where every Coke can has a different saying on it. And so this is some of the opportunities to get to the market and to make things personal. But again, why the Indigo? Why not another type of press? Well, there's a couple unique features about the Indigo press. One, it's been around for quite a while. It's an established technology. It's a growing technology. And Hewlett-Packard does an excellent job working with printers to be able to get them to have the quality that's needed, but also to stir up their creativities to look for new markets. And so with Hewlett-Packard's backing, again, it's a growing area. What else about the Indigo press? Well, it gives the best quality. And so the image conforms very well to the paper surface. Just for example, if you had a piece of copy paper in your office from a standard dry toner electroreprographic copy machine. If you look at that paper and you look at the image, you will see that it's somewhat glossy. It has a different reflection than the background paper. And this is a lower quality. And so it gives not the true impression of what you want the image to be. But if you took a sheet of paper printed on an Indigo press, you would find that the print matches the paper. If the paper is matte, the print image is matte. If the paper is more glossy, the print image will be glossy. And why is this? It's because of one of the unique features of the Indigo press, and is that they print on a drum, just like normal electrographic printing, and then they transfer the image to a blanket. And then they go from a rubber blanket onto the paper. And in this way, it conforms to the surface. What else makes the Indigo press unique? Well, it uses a liquid toner system. So whereas a normal copy machine would have dry toner, and that toner would melt onto the paper surface and be fused or melted into the paper, the Indigo press uses a liquid toner. And this liquid toner is a polymer, a particular polymer, a polyethylene acrylic acid, methacrylic acid material. And in that polymer, you have the pigment of the different colors. And then that polymer is suspended in an oil. And thus you have what they would call a liquid toner. And this is what's transferred to the blanket and eventually to the paper. Why is this an advantage? Well, among other things, it melts at a lower temperature. And in so doing, you don't put as much stress on the paper, thermal stress. You don't have as much expansion. And so you get better registration and better quality. Couple wonderful things that HP's built into the press. All that oil, the volatile oil, is recaptured and reused. So it's also very environmentally friendly. But the advantages go even farther. The Indigo press is able to match Pantone colors. So Hewlett-Packard has always had an agreement with Pantone, and they have set up the press so that you can get the Pantone colors that print shops are familiar with. And so you also get an excellent resolution. It's an excellent machine in terms of maintenance and runnability. And so here we have an excellent machine with very high quality, with Hewlett-Packard standing behind it. However, it has always had one deficiency, and that is that the images printed onto the paper don't stick well to the paper. So ever since the press has been developed, the paper used in it has been treated with some type of additive to improve the adhesion of the images. And so let's go on to the next slide. And so if adhesion is the main problem, then you need a way of measuring the adhesion. And what Hewlett-Packard has set up is some standard criteria for measuring adhesion. They use two types of images, two different black images. One is 100% coverage of ink on the paper of black ink. The other is 290% coverage of the paper with ink. And it's a combination of yellow and magenta and cyan and black ink. And it gives a darker black image. These inks, once they're printed onto the paper, a tape test is done to see how much of the ink will be pulled off by the tape. For the black image, they will do the test after 10 minutes, and they look for 90% adhesion of the ink to get a 3-star rating. And so they have 3-star, 2-star, and 1-star ratings, 3-star being the best. But in their testing, they will give a numerical number of how good the adhesion has been. With the photo black ink, it's a more difficult test. There's less adhesion of the ink to the surface. And when you pull the tape off, they're looking for 80% ink coverage, or 80% ink adhesion. So Those are the tests, and they will run the test for the photo black at 10 minutes and at 60 minutes. Now, there's two centers in the world Hewlett-Packard has for testing the paper to get official qualification. One is in the Rochester Institute of Technology in the United States, and the other one is an HP facility in Singapore. So that's the main test. There's a few complications with it. The tape used for the test has changed over time, and there's now a correction factor built in when the testing is done. So we can talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But beyond what we do for the adhesion testing for Hewlett-Packard, many mills also have their own unique testing criteria. And some of that will depend on the customer they're making the paper for. So let's go to the next slide. So this is an example of a paper that was made, or a test that's used by a company. And they use a 3M Scotch 230 tape. That's the original tape that Hewlett-Packard used for the test. They put a certain weight roller on the tape when they lie it, or when they put it on the paper to be consistent. And then they test the adhesion after 15 minutes and an hour. And in their case, they do the pull of the tape at a 180-degree angle, or close to the paper surface. Hewlett-Packard will do a 90-degree test, pulling almost straight up. And Hewlett-Packard, I mentioned, has stopped using the 230 tape. 3M has stopped making it. And so they've switched to a 234 tape, which is much more aggressive. It's a much stickier tape. And so if you send a paper to, let's go back a slide, still Tom. All right, yeah, so if you send a paper to Hewlett-Packard, they will do the tape test now with the 234 tape, and then divide the result by 0.9, thus increasing the value. And so to get a 3-star qualification from Hewlett-Packard with the 234 tape, one really only needs 72% adhesion of the image. And again, this is a correction factor to get back to where they used to be. And realistically, a tape test is a very aggressive test for an image. In normal use, you're not going to be taking an image, a high-quality image, and putting a piece of tape on it and pulling it off. Let's go to the next slide then. Beyond the adhesion test, though, there are other tests that Hewlett-Packard is concerned with, and they approve the media or the paper on a number of factors. One is its runnability, how it runs through the press. Another is how well does the ink transfer to the paper. Another is there any latent image built up from your particular paper on the blanket of the press? All these things, along with normal tests like does it curl and is it consistent, are a concern. You don't want to be making paper that's going to jam up the equipment or cause issues, or especially do anything that would harm the blanket on the printing press. So all these things are taken into account, and Hewlett-Packard has criteria, and in the end you can send paper into them and get an official qualification. Now, having said that, a lot of mills, again, will do their own testing, and also Solenis can help you with testing of your paper. I find that we have tended to do a lot of testing of just the adhesion. That's the most difficult test. And so we can very easily help you, or you can send to a printer nearby possibly to get an adhesion test done. So now I just want to spend some time going into the history of the additives that have been used on paper for the Indigo Press to give this adhesion, since this is the key factor. Well, the very first material was the addition of polyethylene imine to the surface. This was added to the paper after it left the paper mill. It was added separately in a separate treatment. It was expensive, it's time consuming, and it tends to yellow. It's still being used at some places and in some applications. And it just is a testimony to how much people like the print quality of the Indigo Press, to go through the expense and the cost of treating the paper to be able to use it on the Indigo Press. That's how much different people like the images. After the polyethyleneamine came another additive, polyethylene acrylic acid dispersions. And most of those materials in this part of the world were bought from Dow Chemical. It's an effective material in terms of giving adhesion, but you have to add a lot of it to the paper. And it has some compatibility issues with other additives that might be used on the size press of the paper machine. It is an anionic dispersion, so you can't use it with things like cationic starch. You can't use it with certain additives without it interfering. You can have sometimes problems with the broke that comes back into the machine. I put the golf ball, it's a little golf ball image on the top there, just as a reminder also that when you're adding an anionic emulsion of a material like ethylene acrylic acid, it's the same chemistry that's used to make golf ball covers. So if you mix that polymer with something like a calcium salt or an aluminum salt or any other multivalent ion, you will form a very, very tough deposit that will be very difficult to remove from your paper machine. And so one has to be very careful when running the polyethylene acrylic acid dispersions at a size press. There's also a technology out there, anionic polystyrene materials, something like a styrene acrylic acid or a styrene alpha methylstyrene acrylic acid. Solenis has these available. We have found that they're not nearly as good as the new technology we have. And generally, some mills have used it to obtain 2-star performance. Not the best adhesion, but a little bit lower level of adhesion. And so that's going to lead us then into a discussion of what we think is a new concept. It's not so new anymore. We've had it for not many years, but a number of years now, and a new chemistry and a new way of getting this adhesion. And so I don't want to scare you off, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how our chemistry works and what it is and why we think it's better. But really what it comes down to, why it works, you have to look at the thermodynamics. If you're talking adhesion, if you're talking mixing of polymers, if you're even talking chemical reactions, everything is controlled by the thermodynamics. And by that I mean you need to get something to a lower energy state for the process to occur. So if you want to get mixing of two materials, the energy has to go to a lower state. If you want to get adhesion, the energy has to go to a lower state. And this brings up a very familiar equation for people who work with thermodynamics. And the free energy is a combination of the enthalpy and the entropy. The enthalpy is our heat of mixing, or the enthalpy of the material is sort of its energy state. The entropy is a measure of randomness. And so in this equation, if you had no interactions and you were just mixing two fairly neutral materials, the heat of mixing is generally unfavorable. There's no reason for it to lower the energy. But the improvement of adhesion or mixing of materials would come from an increase in entropy. You take two materials, you mix them together, you have something that's more random. The problem is if you're working with polymers, the entropy is very low. And so there's a very small driving force for polymers to stick together. But fortunately, on the heat of mixing, there can be interactions between molecules to make the heat of mixing favorable. And that's what we're going to look at. So if we go to the next slide. When we talked about the polyethyleneamine, why does it work? Well, it's a water-soluble material. It's a very highly cationic material. And as I mentioned early in the talk, the toner used in the Indigo Press is a polyethylene acrylic acid. That means it's an anionic material. And so you put a cationic material on the surface, you put on an anionic polymer particle, and the two materials can adhere. And that would be a favorable interaction. Now, having said that, very few cationic materials have worked. Polyethylene imine is the exception. And we're not quite sure why that is. It may be that the adhesion is too rapid. So you can't just take any cationic material and put it on the surface and get good adhesion. Nor really is polyethylene imine that effective. The next material, polyethylene acrylic acid, we mentioned that was one of the newer treatments. That is essentially the identical chemistry to what's on the toner of the press. And so what you have is two materials that are exactly alike mixing together. And so it's the old chemistry term, like dissolves like. Or in other words, there's no unfavorable energy when the two mix, and entropy will drive the mixing, and the two materials will melt together. Now, another way of thinking about this, let's say we were talking polyethylene imine. It would be like having magnets with all one polarity, and then adding a magnet of another type that has the opposite polarity. And so you know how magnets stick together. Very crude picture of what would happen in an ionic interaction. Polyethylene acrylic acid would be like having just materials that are not magnetic at all, just thrown into a pile and mixed together. There really is no attraction, but they simply mix. And then to separate them takes some energy. So, some problems though with both of these materials. Again, they're both ionic in nature. They both have strong charges. That means that they can interact with other materials in your size press on your paper machine. Or let's say you have a coating formulation, which we'll talk about in a little while. These materials are going to interact with those materials, and they can cause deposits. They can interfere with things like optical brightening agents. And so there is another option, and so that's what we want to talk about, a better option, and that would be the new Solenis products. Now, before I get into that, I just pause for a moment. I like this particular image. I raised three girls myself, took them to many aquariums and many museums, and always was able to see the wonder in their eyes as they saw something new, saw something different. And you could see them beginning to think. And really, some of that is what led to the invention that we're going to talk about. People would call me up and say, is there anything you can do that's better than what's out there? And I began to look at the polymers that were being used and said, you know, we can do something better. But even beyond that, I just want to make a thought for a moment, in that it's good to wonder if we can do something better. It's good to wonder if you can make a paper that's a little bit better. It's good to ask those questions of what if I try this, and what if I do something a little bit different. And I'm hoping that those of you who have tuned into this seminar think that way, that you're asking questions and wondering, what can you do? What can you do to make your paper useful? Or what can you do to improve the paper for Indigo presses? And so I think that's true of the people that are on here tonight. You know, you're excellent scientists, you're excellent paper makers. And so now let's go into the third part of the talk. And that's where I want to say, what can you do? And what is the best option for you to make an indigo paper? And so there's a number of criteria. The first one, of course, is performance. Whatever additive we use, and ours in particular is very good, does it give the performance? Does it give the adhesion? Does it give the desired properties? Does it, you know, does the image stick to the paper? That's the biggest factor. But then beyond that, after so many years in the industry, in many industries, I know that it's not good enough just to have the performance if you can't use it easily. And so what we've designed is a product that can be used very easily in a paper mill, can be used very easily on your paper machine. Because if you can't use it easily, what's going to happen? What's going to happen in the nighttime shift? Are they going to run things properly? And if it's difficult to run, it's going to be difficult to get consistent results. And so our product is very easy to use. And of course, the last thing, it's got to be something that's of a reasonable cost. And so these are the things I set out to do, and we accomplished. And we'll talk a little bit more about the advantages. But first, let me talk specifically about the chemistry we've invented. And so we're basing the basis of the invention as, again, in thermodynamics. And in this case, we look to improve the interaction with the polymer that we chose with the ink. But we did it in a different way. We chose a polymer, polyethyloxazolene, that's very unique. It's a polymer unlike any others. And if you look at the structure there, you'll see I drew a little delta minus in red. That's a carbonyl group. And that carbonyl group has a fairly strong dipole, giving a fairly strong anionic charge. But there's no counter cationic dipole or positive dipole on the molecule. And what this means is that the polymer is sitting there with the ability to interact, but it doesn't interact with itself. And so what this means is that when it mixes with something else, another polymer, it can develop a strong interaction, much stronger than it has with itself. And if you go back to the thermodynamics, what that essentially means is that there is no interaction with itself, but an interaction with another material, and that's going to lower your enthalpy. So that's the driving force. That's what makes this material unique. Again, it doesn't interact with itself. It would be almost like you had a basket full of one type of polarity magnet, and everything was of one polarity, and you put anything else in there of a magnet, and it's going to immediately bond strongly. And so that's the mechanism that we're relying on here. And it's worked extremely well, as we'll show you. The nice thing about this polymer is it's water soluble. It's not a dispersion that's going to come out and form deposits. It has no ionic charge in terms of a strong, what we would call cationic or anionic charge. It's just got a dipole. What that means is it doesn't interfere with other materials. It doesn't interfere with optical brightening agents. It can be used with any different starch. Because it's water soluble, it's easy to use, it's easy to pump, it's easy to add to the paper machines. And again, we'll talk about that in a moment. So that's the chemistry. So as we've gone out to various mills, all this has been confirmed. We found going to mills that because there's no ionic charge, it's been compatible with every different starch that's been used. It's compatible with all different sizing agents that could be added at the size press. Or even strength additives could be added at the size press. I know in Asia there's a lot of eucalyptus pulp used. Well, you can easily add a strength additive, a surface strength additive to your size press with our chemistry to improve the surface strength. It's compatible with optical brightening agents, anionic ones and cationic ones. It's even compatible with all the chemistry used for inkjet printing, such as calcium salts. So yes, it's very versatile. It can be used in any situation. Because it's water soluble, there's no deposits. It's very easy to run, very easy to wash out lines, very easy to mix with different materials. You don't have to worry about different hardnesses of water or other things that may be happening. And also there's no issues when it goes back in the broke. There's no stickies formed or anything like that. And it's very efficient. What we found was that this chemistry is far more efficient than the other ones that are on the market. that means you use a small amount of the material. And that helps in a lot of ways. And so let's go on then to some of the successes we've had. And now we want to talk about, in this part of the talk, what can you do? And we want to go through some examples. And I realize that every mill is unique. And I think that's an advantage because for our Solenis product, because again, it is compatible with so many different situations. It can be used in a lot of different instances. And so let's look at some of the variables you might have in your mill when you're making paper. And we'll just talk about uncoated free sheet paper at the moment. But we can also talk later, if we want, about coated paper or about primer applications. But for right now, let's talk about treating an uncoated free sheet. What goes into the size press? Well, certainly starch, and there's many different types of starches used. You can certainly use tapioca starch, which is common in Asia. You can add any type of optical brightening agent. You can even add optical brightening agent enhancers that are out there, like some of the sulfite materials. You can add salts, again, like I mentioned earlier, things like calcium salts. You can also add aluminum salts. You can add fillers to your size press if you so desire, and some people do for other types of printing. You can add dyes for dyeing the paper without any concern. And again, you can add things like strength additives. And there's really many different things that could be tried. And I want to stress again that every mill is unique. And so what you're going to do is going to be a little bit different than somebody else. And I think this is, again, maybe one of the advantages of our product isn't just the product itself, but the fact that Solenis still has a full research staff working on paper. We still have a very large applications group that tests paper and can help you test any of the formulations you would like to try. And you would certainly be welcome to observe those either in person or by video, or we've set up some nice video equipment recently so people can watch the trials. And so, yeah, a lot of advantages. And I have one example here. And in this example, we tried a very difficult base sheet. And I'll explain a little bit later what I mean by a difficult base sheet. And we used the 290% photo black images in 10 minutes of testing. So this is about the most difficult test there can be. And we looked at what's the effect of level of our product and the use of different starches. And you can see as we put in 0.3% of our product, all of the materials did fairly well. In some cases, they didn't pass the adhesion target. Other cases, they did, and at the higher level, they passed easily. But what we saw, though, is we changed the starch, going from a low viscosity to a medium viscosity starch. The adhesion improved. Went to a higher viscosity starch, it became even better. And if we switched to a cationic starch, we got excellent results. And the higher viscosity cationic starches gave tremendous results, even on the most difficult situation. And so why is this the case? And what are we looking at here? And what we have found is one of the keys with our product is to keep it at the surface of the paper. Our product is so efficient, we're not adding very much of it. And because we're not adding very much of it, if it all soaks into the paper, there's nothing left at the surface to adhere with the images being printed onto the paper. And so the desire is to keep at least some of the product at the surface. How do you do that? You can do various additives, or you can do something like using cationic starch. Now, most people don't need to worry about that. There's plenty of product at the surface, but there are some base sheets that are very difficult, and that's what I'm talking about here. And there's various ways we can then control that, where that material ends up. Let's go to the next slide. And so what do we want to do? Another variable in the paper is the wet end conditions. And you can use any type of standard pulp or even non-standard pulps. You can use any type of sizing agent, the ketene dimers, the liquid ketene dimers, the ASA or rosin. all can be used at the wet end. You can use optical brightening agents at the wet end. You can use strength additives, or you can use PCC or GCC or clay or other fillers. It makes no difference. Our product still works very well. I think the only time we've seen any issues when somebody has used an extremely high level of alkyl ketene dimer, AKD. And that is because AKD is unique in the sizing world in that it can crystallize on the surface of the paper and give a very hydrophobic, very low surface energy. But I'm talking about paper that maybe have hundreds or even several hundred seconds of sizing. And almost nobody does that anymore. AKD can be so effective, it can even hold out color inkjet inks and even have them beat up on the surface. So if you overdo it, you can get some issues. And if you're interested, we can talk some other time about the differences of wet end chemistry and what it makes a difference in the size press. In this case, we also looked at different refining of the paper, and we found that a lot of different conditions worked extremely well. And so, yes, you can do almost anything at the wet end of the paper machine. The only thing, again, we look for that might be an issue is porosity. If the sheet is too porous and everything at the size press soaks in, then it becomes more difficult. So let's go to the next slide. What's another consideration when you're making paper? Well, the sheet properties. What's the basis weight? What's the smoothness or the texture of the paper? And what we found is that we've been successful on a very wide range of basis weights and a very wide range of surface texture, from very smooth to a textured surface. And again, the only thing that has really concerned us over time has been sheet porosity. Most mills have had no issue at all, but there's been a few mills with very open sheets. If you're familiar with the Gurley porosity scale, they were in the low teens for their porosity numbers. But even in those cases, we were able to overcome the issue by doing different things to hold the product at the surface. Some I already mentioned, things like using cationic starch or increasing the molecular weight of the starch. But you can also increase the starch solids. Or if you have a metered size press, that's great. You shouldn't have any issue at all, no matter what base sheet it looks like. Unfortunately, many of the Indigo grades are made on smaller paper machines, and many of them have puddle size presses, at least in our part of the world, in the United States. So if you have a metered size press, wonderful. You're going to get really, really good results. But some mills, even with all those changes, have presented a challenge, and we've come out with a second generation and recently a third generation product to deal with specific mills that may have very open sheets or very unusual conditions. Before we get into those, what are some of the other things? Well, we can also look at the size press conditions at your mill and see what's important. What is the temperature of the size press? That's really about the only thing that we concern ourselves with. People have found that when they add our additive in, there's been no changes needed in the size press conditions. But let's say you add our product to the starch coming right from the starch cooker. It's not going to work. We like to have our product run at a little bit of the low end of the size press temperature range, typically around 56 degrees centigrade. Will it work at higher temperatures? Yes, other mills have been running it. The only time we've seen problems, again, is if somebody has put our product in directly with a starch coming right from a cooker, where it's very hot, or adding it into a line where the starch is very hot. And in those cases, we have seen some issues. The only other thing maybe we've seen, and we're being very open in this seminar, is that we do see a reduction of the sizing numbers when we put our additive in at a size press. So That's also usually not a concern because for digital grades, the sizing is not important. But let's say somebody wants to also use the digital grade for offset printing and they do have some specification. Well, you can easily add a little bit of sizing, more sizing at the wet end, or add almost any type of sizing agent at the size press to raise those sizing numbers up a little bit if you need to. And again, I want to stress, every mill is different. What you're going to do is be different, and Solenis is going to be here to work with you. Again, I mentioned we can test almost any condition you can think of and see what it would do. So any type of size press mixture we can test. We can do probably 20 runs in a day easily of different conditions and send them out for testing for adhesion or other properties. Again, Solenis has a complete applications lab for making paper and treating paper. So let us work with you and see what we can do. And so again, think of what you may want to try. Maybe you would want to try inkjet product materials in your sheet. At the same time, you have an indigo sheet. Maybe you want to put in strength additives. Maybe you have some special additive. We're more than willing to work with you and see how it performs. Next slide. And so we've got a couple case histories here. This was one where we went to a paper mill that had never made indigo paper before. They had a size press where they added optical brightening agent and sodium chloride and cationic starch, and they put our product in with the idea of just doing a quick test to see if they saw any change in the paper. Well, they didn't even know the product was in there. It didn't change anything at all in their performance on their paper machine. And after about an hour, they've been running our product. They pulled it off. We sent the paper off and tested it for adhesion by the Hewlett-Packard methods, and we sent it up to Rochester Institute of Technology, and the paper had perfect adhesion. And so the mill sent the paper in and had it qualified. And so with a couple hour trial at a paper mill, they had an indigo grade that they could sell. It was that easy. Another mill was looking to try our product on a wide variety of base sheets and conditions and textures. They had several mills making indigo paper, and they couldn't use other products at some of the mills. So they took our product and they found that it worked everywhere, it worked at all their different base sheets, all their different grades, and they were all qualified for use on indigo presses by Hewlett-Packard. And so that was a great testimony of what we can do. But as I mentioned earlier, there are some mills that are maybe more unique than others, maybe more of a problem than others. And so I came out with a second generation product in which I added aluminum salts along with our material. And so the best working one was polyaluminum chloride, or PAC, we call it. And what we found is we add this material along with our additive, and we took paper that was passing the qualifications. Again, this was a very difficult base sheet with the most difficult image and a 10-minute test. And if you see the white bars on this in this plot, they had more than the 80% adhesion needed, but they were close to the edge and the mill was a little uncomfortable. And so we added in polyaluminum chloride, and the adhesion became much, much better with the addition of this product. And so adding a little bit of PAC can also greatly improve the adhesion of an already really good product. And so that leads to our second generation, and that's what I mentioned up top here, is our product with the addition of aluminum salts. And you can use PAC or you can use alum. PAC has the most effect on improving adhesion. Its downside is, though, that it will interfere with optical brightening agents added at the size press, not at the wet end. So you can still add the OBA at the wet end. But you can add alum. It's not quite as effective, but it does improve adhesion, and it won't interfere with the optical brightening agents. That being said, we still kept pressing on, and recently we've come out with a third generation product where we add a special filler with our product. and it's giving enhanced adhesion, again, over the starting product. And so we're taking a product that's already much better than the competitive materials and making it even better. And finally, we're doing some other interesting things in the new technology area. And that is, we found that our product can be used in coating formulations. So you can add our product directly into a coating formulation to make coated paper for indigo presses. And we came out with a slightly different version of our product that's much higher solids, 35% solids, so it doesn't interfere with the water balance in a coating formulation. And so if you're a coated paper manufacturer, you can use our additive in your coating formulation. We've also then found some other interesting things recently, and that is that our product works tremendously just as itself as a primer to treat paper that's already been made, or even treat plastic substrates. And so if you put it on a plastic substrate, we found that a 4% solution works extremely well. It dries quickly, it's non-tacky, it's nice and clear and stays clear, and it gives perfect adhesion to the plastic substrates. And so this was some images from a printer, and they did the test on this plastic substrate. Again, that was treated with our product, and it worked extremely well. And so that's something new that's coming up. We are also in the process of getting regulatory approvals. So if those are familiar with the European regulatory process, the BFR, we're submitting our product to get approved. That's a long, slow process. But in the US, we should have FDA approval fairly soon. Toxicologists have already signed off saying that our product is safe for food contact. And the polymer that I'm talking about, that polyethyl oxazolene, it is already used for food contact and things like adhesives. And we will also be seeking regulatory approval in the Asia regions. So that's coming, and so you can use things for food grades. And there's a lot of other things we're working on, and we're excited about the future. But really now, I want to give a chance for you to ask questions. Hopefully you're speculating about what your mill can do, and maybe you have certain specific concerns. And so you can either unmute your phone and ask a question, or you can type in a question in the chat window, and we'd be very happy to answer anything you would like to know. And forgive me as I have to lean forward to read the fine print. So somebody is saying, what surcharge? Okay, so we're getting into cost. So yeah, I'm in the research group. I know the business folks always get upset if I start talking about cost. You know, that's their part of the world. But certainly contact Tom Hayden, who's hosting this seminar, or your local salesperson. Wang is on the call, so you can see his image here. He's over in one of our excellent. I would call him a scientist, but he's really in the business group over in Asia, and so he can also help you. So yeah, I won't answer a cost question. That's outside of research. Let's see. Have you tried any application methods other than a size press? Yes. So as I mentioned, you can put it into a coating formulation, and so that would be a coating type application. You can put it directly on the paper as a primer, and that can be some type of a transfer roll. You know, we've had people ask about spraying it on, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work. In fact, I think it would work really well. We've had people talk about putting it on even at a calendar stack. Have I tried it? I have not. I've done drawdowns in the lab, and again, we've used size presses, and we have used transfer rolls, I should say that. So, yeah, there's no reason why it wouldn't work. It should spray extremely well. It should transfer extremely well. So, yeah, good question. but certainly, yeah, I don't see why it couldn't be added in any way that you would like to add it. Certainly, probably other questions.
Just a reminder that you can ask questions in the chat window or just unmute your phone if anybody has any additional questions.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know what everybody on the phone, what type of paper you are making. Is it uncoated free sheet coated paper, primer applications? Maybe you can drop us a note and let us know. Or you can also anytime email us a question or call us. We certainly are open to talking to you. You know, you may want to think about it. Maybe you have a question, and you know, after the seminar is over, yeah, please reach out and we'll start a conversation.
And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and a copy will be posted on solenis.com for viewing later, or to share with people who may not have had a chance to join. If there are no other questions at this time, then that concludes the webinar. Thank you, Dan, for walking us through that, and thank you everybody for their attendance. And as Dan mentioned, please feel free to reach out to your local Solenis representative, myself, or Dr. Varnell directly to ask any questions. With that, we will let everybody go. Have a good day.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome.
Talk to you soon.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Somebody has asked a question, any lifetime for the chemical? It's got a very long shelf life. So shelf life's at least a year for the product. And on the paper, yeah, there's no issue with time. And even after it's printed, the adhesion will just keep improving over time. So after a day, it's almost always 100%. So good question.
Dan, I think so. There's a question also, application method other than size press.
Have you tried application methods? Yeah, so I did talk about, yeah,
Okay.
other methods of coating. Yeah, certainly it's worth it. I don't see why it wouldn't work. And here's another one. Good question on shelf life of the coated substrate. Yes, it's at least a year.
Yeah. Bill, just to let you know, because the current primer paper mills have been using, there's a problem like what Dan said, PEI chemistry, polyethylene chemistry, not able to be used in paper mills because the shelf life is virtually 5 days. So that's where our solution stands out. Yeah, once you optimize the paper, you can keep it maybe 6 months, 1 year, depends on your storage condition. Yeah, easily,
True.
no problem.
True. Oh, very good. Well,
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for the good questions. And yeah, have a great day.
Thank you.